well, this week we're going to talk about the Office for Civil Rights resolution agreement with the school district. And I'm pleased to welcome Vice President of the Board of Education, Ken Dauber, who's going to share some of his insights into this whole process that's been happening over the past years with Pali and gun investigations. So, Ken, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
OCR, the school district has a fractious history, I would say. There's been some cooperation, some pushback. But I want to talk about this week what the discussion was at the school board and where we really are with the Pali and gun investigations. Ken, it seems like most of the board was sort of one mind when it comes to how to respond to this resolution agreement. In whole, but there were some disagreements, some debates about two particular issues, the independent investigation and also timeline and responsiveness with the OCR. Could you unpack for us a little bit the first issue about the independent investigation that the OCR is asking of the school district, and what would that entail?
Sure, and I want to emphasize that I'm speaking as a board member and not
Certainly.
On behalf of the board or the district here, so you're hearing my opinions. So the context for this is that OCR has engaged in a series of investigations of civil rights issues at Pali and at Gun, mostly around Title IX, sexual harassment and sexual violence issues, and has reached some findings that the district has not complied with Title IX in these cases. And so now we are, and they've brought a proposed resolution agreement to the district to move forward, essentially, in response to that lack of compliance, to put the district back on the right path, and then also to deal with the consequences for students and staff members who were harmed.
Yeah.
And as part of that, they have proposed that the district agree to independent investigations, that is third party outside the district.
Approved by OCR also.
Right. Using investigators approved by OCR that would look at at what happened in these cases. And also look at the district handling of incidents over the past 5 years or so to see, essentially, I think, if the particular issues that arose in the complaints and the OCR's investigations were systemic and what the extent of them was.
We're really looking at policies, procedures, how they were handled, and if there were any missteps.
Exactly, yes. We know that there were missteps. So what's the extent of those? And, we have the same interest, I think, in the district, which is we want to know, what happened in these cases, and we also want to understand the scope of the issue so that we can fix it. I mean, that's really the ultimate goal here.
Some of these cases, just to remind people, one involved former Pali principal Phil Winston, and there were questions about his actions, whether they were sexually harassing of both staff and students. Also Kevin Sharp, a teacher at Pali, who engaged in a relationship with a student. So one of the issues that I find it's sort of amorphous, because the independent investigations, as proposed, seem to want to investigate everything that has transpired in the last several years. Is that correct? And Superintendent Max McGee was questioning whether or not it was absolutely necessary to be going back to students and staff who are no longer present. I understand that can be there may not be a bright line as to who to include and who not to include, but I think the board was, it seemed to me, very certain that everyone who has been affected really should be part of this investigation. And it shouldn't be limited in some other fashion.
I think that's right. I think that you heard that clearly, particularly on the behavior incident reports, which is looking at how the district has handled complaints over the last 5 years. There's some desire, which I think is reasonable, to understand exactly what OCR is looking for in terms of the third-party investigations, to understand what the cost is. I expect that OCR is going to clarify and to make it clear that they're looking for a reasonable cost investigation, and that we will end up agreeing with OCR that that's the right scope. That's my expectation.
Sorry.
No, we're gonna. The superintendent is going to have a conversation with OCR next week on exactly that point.
I was sort of surprised that while, these are different cases, this is sexual harassment, not, I was surprised at the district's previous experience with a resolution agreement, a letter of findings in that process, which it already went through a few years ago in the term and middle school case, which involved bullying, so different kind of harassment, but the district has gone through this process in a sense before, and I was surprised that there wasn't more reflection on, well, what was our experience with the timing of when we got the letter of findings versus the resolution agreement, and what it has been like the monitoring afterwards, and there was sort of looking outwards to what other, like Melissa mentioned, this really high profile letter from OCR with the University of Virginia, but there's experience, right here within the district already.
Right. I mean, I think that I am certainly less concerned about, things that have happened in other places that, and more concerned about, have do we cooperate with OCR? How do we make use of their insights? We all have the same goal. We share a goal with OCR, which is, making sure that our students are protected at school and that they can enjoy the educational experience that they're entitled to under state and federal law. And so, the district has received oral review of the findings. So there's no mystery here about what it is that the OCR found. And, frankly, all of the issues have been clear for quite some time. So I don't expect any surprises in the written findings either.
And there was this question about, is it appropriate to sign a resolution agreement before we officially see this findings in writing and the timing of that? And the district's new attorney said in her experience, you usually get the letter of findings once the resolution agreement is finalized. Is that your
That's my understanding as well, and that's what the case processing manual also says. So I'm completely comfortable with that process. I don't think there's anything that we would need to know about the findings that we don't already know from the briefing that OCR has given senior staff that would somehow lead us to want to think differently about the resolution agreement.
Yeah.
So the findings were given orally. Was the entire board privy to that discussion, or?
No, it was a meeting between, I think there were two meetings actually, between senior staff members of the district and OCR attorneys. They were quite lengthy meetings, and notes were taken. And so, like I said, I think the district is fully informed.
Senior staff then informed the board.
The board, right.
Yeah.
I was surprised that those notes apparently haven't been provided to you guys yet, or they weren't as of Tuesday.
I think that's right. I mean, I've certainly had a conversations with the superintendent about it. And like I said, there's no surprises here. Anybody who's familiar with, the Phil Winston case and the Kevin Sharp case, the issues with the fact that the district didn't perform the required Title IX investigation in a timely way, the fact that the Verde rape culture articles didn't produce a Title IX investigation. I mean, all of these defects are well known, I think, to people who've been paying attention. And what I heard from the superintendent, none of that surprised me about OCR's conclusions about it. The gun case, many of these cases have been thoroughly described in the weekly. And so I think the whole community, I don't think the community is gonna be surprised in the broad outline. I mean, there may be some news in the details.
Right.
It seems like there's been some discontent expressed from members of the district with working with OCR over the years. I mean, there's been complaints about difficulty in communication, length of time it takes to accomplish various processes. I wanted to get your opinion on how does a district work with a federal agency? Is it proper and appropriate to kind of set timelines or try to agree upon timelines ahead of time? That was one of the items that Max McGee had tried to address in the proposed resolution agreement. That I think there was a 45-day turnaround that he was requesting, and I was just kind of curious about what's realistic when working with a federal agency and trying to get them to do things within a certain time frame.
I think it's useful to communicate to OCR that it would be helpful for us to get timely responses because then it makes us more effective. I think that's useful. I think that what we don't want to do, and I think frankly what has happened in the past in the district's relationship with OCR, is that the sort of insistence on timeframes and the sort of complaining about OCR process was really in the service of resistance to cooperation rather than trying to facilitate cooperation. And I just want to say, what is at stake here is that in the first encounter with OCR, I think the right response, which is what we're trying to do now, is to really learn from this, these events and from OCR's input and fix the problems. That didn't happen the first time around, and I think that has led directly to this second set of findings. We didn't fix the problem, and that has real consequences for students. I mean, the lack of attention to, the lack of a Title IX investigation, in I guess it was in 2013 around the rape culture articles. Meant that we didn't have a grooming policy in place. We have a student who, has, if the allegations are correct, suffered, a real serious harm as a consequence of inappropriate behavior by a teacher at Pali in the case of Mr. Farrell. Those are, we can talk about these sort of bureaucratic relationships with federal civil rights agencies. What is at stake on the ground is student safety, and I think it was a missed opportunity the first time around, and we are not going to miss that opportunity this time to make things better.
From your take on these cases, the findings, where do you think the key changes need to be made within the district in order for it to come into compliance? You mentioned the grooming policy level, but certainly there's some processes that are not quite working.
That's right, and we can point to the recent weekly article about the Jordan case, I think, as an example.
The
bullying case at Jordan, where it's sort of obvious on its face that the district's policies regarding the uniform complaint procedure were not followed by staff members. So I think there's policy alignment, which is in the resolution agreement, to making sure that our policies are compliant with the law. And then there's, the sort of where the rubber meets the road is actual implementation of those policies. And what we need to get to the point where compliance is routine, and it's an extraordinary event that comes quickly to management attention when we don't have compliance, and we are not there yet on either of those points.
Well, it's certainly almost a culture shift too. Max was describing staff's real fear around OCR coming to conduct interviews and just feeling, which is understandable, of sort of not knowing what to expect. And I think he even said people worried about wanting to get their own lawyers or wondering if they needed to do that, and sort of, and it seems hopeful that in this sort of next chapter of things, the district will start to shift away from that and view it as more of a positive thing.
Yeah, I think that my belief is that to the extent that there are staff fears about OCR's engagement, that they were created by the district and board's overly defensive and combative stance towards OCR in the first round, and that they don't reflect the reality of the situation, which is that this really is an agency that is here to help the district achieve compliance. And it certainly isn't putting individual staff members in jeopardy. You know, obviously, if we look at our performance as an organization and we see issues with it, then those are issues that we need to address. And to the extent that we have staff members who aren't, you know, conversant with or implementing policy, then that's an issue for management to deal with. But OCR is not the problem in that case. It's that we need to get our practices, you know, where they need to be.
Yeah, and thinking about some of these cases, including the Jordan bullying case, it's just struck me that the district, like many organizations, in some ways just has a failure to communicate, you know, internally or to evaluate processes that have already been established. I think in the reporting, if I'm remembering this correctly, that there was no review or report to the board every 6 months or a year that these are the UCPs that have been filed. The uniform
I think that's in the resolution agreement too, to have more regular updates on any, I forget if it was UCP or Title IX complaints, but
yeah, just the feedback loop.
Right,
We've
exactly.
put this process in place.
Close the
And, I
loop.
mean, that's common for many organizations. So.
Right, right. That basic level of accountability,
Yeah.
and then, you know, the board's role, I think, is to hold senior staff, superintendent primarily, accountable for ensuring that the district is compliant and that we are sort of living out in reality our policies.
Yeah, yeah. This week's meeting was the first discussion, and I know there's a March 7th deadline that's coming up.
yeah, the district has 90 days to respond to the
respond.
resolution agreement. It sounds like the superintendent is hopeful that he'll bring back something next month, so early.
Right. I expect we'll be done earlier than the deadline.
Okay, yeah. And are there any other issues involving this OCR situation that you think is important to bring up at this point?
I don't think so. I think that you know, the next step is we're going to get some clarification from OCR on some of the issues with the agreement. That will happen before the next school board meeting. We will have an agenda item at the next school board meeting that so that the board can receive an update. And then what I expect we'll do is to provide direction to the superintendent about how we want to handle the negotiation over the resolution agreement. And what I hope will happen next is that we'll receive a draft agreement that is agreed to by OCR, because I don't think we're going to be looking for very substantial changes. And then we'll approve that, and then we'll get on to the business of implementation.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thanks for unpacking this with us. I really appreciate your expertise on this issue.
Well, I appreciate your having me. It's an important issue for the district, and I always enjoy coming to the weekly to talk over these things.
All right. Well, that's it for this week. And if you liked what you heard, you can subscribe to our webcast below. Always follow us on paloaltoonline.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Palo Alto Weekly, and you can follow Elena at Kadvany on Twitter.